everyone, and I am going to be teaching you a little bit more about how to carve subtractive sculpture. We're going to be using a block like this. It's a hard but lightweight compressed foam. Okay, you see. For my students, we cut it in half and we use a smaller bit, but they come in these large shapes. They're pretty durable, but they are able to be formed. Other materials that you can use if you can't get a hold of this are like floral foam. It's a little squishier, a little bit easier to manipulate, but a little bit harder to get details in. This is the size block that we'll be working on, and you could even see from the pictures kind of a little bit of the process of what you can do. Okay, you can't create everything you want to do with this block. It is hard to carve small details that stick out. And we're going to be doing this as subtractive sculpture. And subtractive sculpture means that you're removing materials. So if something falls off, we're not going to add it back on because that's additive sculpture. Now, if you're working at home and you don't have a lot of tools, you can use materials that you find in your house. And here is some examples of some things that might be around your house that you can use to carve. In this video, I will be teaching you some of the basic techniques, but let's look at the big picture. Are important things to consider. Your goal is to create an expressive object that looks really interesting from your initial idea to the final work. You do research and may include symbolism. Depending on time, we'll have them painted, and that you're using a wide variety of sculpting techniques so it looks interesting from all angles. Oh, and did I mention you have to clean up? You have some prep work before you could even begin to get started with this project. You have to find a place where you can work. Working outside is very good because, well, this leaves a lot of little bits and pieces around, and so you want to make sure that you are protecting the surfaces that you're working in, and you are setting up a situation where you can clean up the best that you can. If you've never used a vacuum before, well, this is your time to learn. So here are some materials that you may have at home that you can use for carving this block. A pair of scissors. If you open it up like this, you can use it easily to carve some bits. You could use silverware, forks and knives. I think the metal ones would work better than plastic, but you could also use some plastic ones. Pencils. Anything that is like a paintbrush or a stick that is sort of pokey, depending on what you're doing. And of course, you could use things like X-Acto knives or utility knives, but you please have to be super careful when you're using these. Now, you may have other tools around your house that you could use. Could be some spatulas or woodworking tools, screwdrivers, little things like this, maybe you have in a toolbox. You may also have some files around your house. Okay, so if your parents or if you or any of your siblings are handy, you might have files. They come in different shapes and sizes. They're also called wraps. So here's another example. And some smaller ones in all different shapes, sizes. This. These last ones are ones that I keep in my classroom for doing this assignment. There's also, look around and see if you can find any tool that could be good for scraping or poking. This is a clay tool, but would work great for foam sculpture. In addition, sandpaper. This one is on a sponge block, but any type of sandpaper would work quite well. Now, if you haven't watched the video on how to get your design onto the block, you want to go back and watch that video. It is linked in the description below. You'll have your initial sketch on the block, but I want you to think of it as living inside the piece of foam. Michelangelo, super famous artist from the Renaissance in Italy, used to always say that he was trying to free his sculptures from marble. Now we're working with foam. It's a little bit easier than marble, but I want you to imagine if your sculpture is living inside of it, and you have to kind of visualize it from all sides. These examples that I have up in the video are his slaves, and they are unfinished works, but they are still so beautiful because you could almost see them trapped within the marble. Here are the first few steps of how I started carving a sculpture. First, I have my drawing sketched out on all sides of the block. I am drawing a little puppy kind of snuggled up into itself. It's good for this type of sculpture to not have too many things that are sticking out of its sides. Your design can be transferred directly by tracing onto the block of foam from your sketches, your preparatory sketches, or tracing them like in my previous video. It's really tricky at this point because you have to think about what can be seen from each side and kind of how that image is blocked into that block of foam, and what would be the parts that would stick out the most and which would be receded back into space. It's really important for you to not worry so much about making mistakes at this point, but just going slowly and working around the entire block from all sides of it. I really like using the handle of the fork to carve out bits. This would also work with a butter knife or a steak knife, and would be a little sharper, so you have to be careful. But it's really good for carving out bits. You're not going to be able to remove large pieces of block with this, but it's really nice for shaping the foam. Files, even nail files could work, but sandpaper or a rasp or file like this, it does work much easier to remove large chunks of the foam. If you need to remove large bits of the block of foam, using something like a saw would be very helpful. However, safety is at the foremost, like super, super important. So watch your fingers. It's not going to be any fun carving your sculpture if you're also carving your hand out. So watch where your thumb and fingers are in placement to the saw. Also, don't carve off too much with the saw. Go slowly and carve off little bits and help refine your shape. Remember, you're trying to slowly let free the sculpture that is trapped inside, just like Michelangelo. Notice how I'm working on all sides of the block. I'm trying to slowly refine my shape from all angles. Constantly flip it over, rotate it, and see where you should work next. Now for my students, you are going to be balancing working on this in school and out of school, and you have different materials in both locations. You may want to save the big carving bits for when you're in school and the smaller details for when you're at home. Throughout my experimentation, I do think that silverware handles work very well depending on their shape. It's not going to ruin the silverware as long as it's not really bendable, but it should work fine and clean up easily in the dishwasher after. After you carve a bit, you're going to realize that you lose some detail and carved it all off. So you may have to go in with your pencil and add more detail to figure out where you have to carve next. This part, I'm really working on some of the details. I'm thinking about undercuts where I can kind of curve in some angles, like under the ears of the puppy and under the nose, to try to create a little bit more dimension and shape so it's not just a blob. Really carve out the three-dimensionality of the features. That way it's not just drawn on, and that will give it more life and interest and make it a better sculpture all around. Now I'm getting closer to the finish line. This isn't the completed sculpture, but it's getting kind of close. I could then decide, if time permitted, if I can paint this and how I would paint this. I added texture all over, so it's going to be interesting in the round from all angles, and the pencil mark will go away when I paint. Here are a few different student examples, each of them taking their own approach, some of them choosing to do animals or different themes with their sculptures, but hopefully you can find some inspiration from this. And don't forget to clean up because it makes a mess.